Tough trade talk could have dramatic consequences as President Trump's moves on China escalate. But Iowa's farm economy could be caught in the crosshairs. We sit down with the Iowa Farm Bureau's Craig Hill and pork producer John Weber on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, April 6th edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
Throughout a nearly two-year campaign for the White House, Donald Trump railed against China as a trade partner in need of tough negotiations. But now, 14 months into his presidency, the talk has become trade policy, with tariffs against China beginning to spiral towards a trade war. Reciprocal tariffs from the crucial Chinese market for Iowa pork, soybeans, and more could have devastating consequences on Iowa farmers and our state's economy. Well, to check the pulse of the farm sector, we're joined by Iowa Farm Bureau President Craig Hill and John Weber, past president of the Iowa Pork Producers Association and the National Pork Producers Council. Gentlemen, welcome to Iowa Press. It's good to have you with us today.
Glad to be here.
Across the table, Erin Murphy is Des Moines Bureau Chief for Lee Enterprises, and Kay Henderson is News Director for Radio Iowa.
Gentlemen, you're both active farmers. Craig, what was your first reaction when you heard that the tariffs were going on?
Well, there's been many proposals that have gone on this past week, and I tell you, I woke up Wednesday morning to a 50-cent loss in soybeans, a 17-cent loss in corn. That's 5% of the market, and you know, agriculture is very vulnerable today. We're at a very fragile place. I don't want to say we're unstable. We are not, but we've had 4 years of declining farm income, 12-year record low farm income. The pork producers have done pretty well, but corn, soybeans have not done so well. We've grown our way out of this, so our economy is fragile. And then this proposal comes along and wipes out what would be any potential for profit for the year. So it's a very alerting and very scary proposition.
John?
Yeah, I was listening to a radio program on the way down that said this was the longest, seemed like the longest week, and I feel a little bit that way in what's happened here in our business. But pork was one of the first sectors to have the tariff announced early last week. And by the way, the pork tariff is implemented. It is additive to what we were already paying going into China. And so, as you commented earlier, we've been anticipating this possibility of happening for almost 2 years, year and a half to 2 years now, with the tough trade rhetoric that went on through the campaign. So it was a day of reckoning. It just shows how critical and vulnerable, as Craig said, we are in agriculture to these type of events.
Well, Craig, you have people from the Trump administration saying, ho, 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 we're just negotiating this $100 billion that we just talked about on Thursday night is not actually implemented yet. We're just in the negotiating phase. Does that make you feel better?
The cavalier comments that came from Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Commerce, when he said, even shooting wars end in negotiation. Well, shooting wars don't end in negotiation. Shooting wars end in casualties and collateral damage. Whether it's a victory or a defeat or some settlement, we are in a trade war. And trade wars don't end well. They're unpredictable. History doesn't show a very good light on positive outcomes from trade wars. It led into World War II, Smoot-Hawley Act, Depression. The embargo by Jimmy Carter, 1980, led to the Farm Depression. This is not a very good place to be in a trade war. They're unpredictable, the duration, the impact. So I'm a little taken aback by this attitude that's come from the White House. It's a very serious matter, and Iowa is going to be the first casualty. Agriculture, Iowa, soybeans, pork. This is what's going to hit the hardest. And so the target is on farmers' backs, and it's a very bad place to be.
John, you keep nodding your head.
Yeah, well, the impact is very real when markets do not like uncertainty. And that's the period we're in. We're in a very uncertain period as to the future of exports. Are these tariffs going to be implemented or are they not? And that's the price we have to pay to get through this period until negotiations are held or until we find out what's going to happen, and certainly hope, for the best case scenario.
So you talk about that impact. What is that? What is going to happen? What are Iowa farmers worried about? Maybe especially the younger farmers who are just getting in and don't have their operation built up as some of the larger operations. What are the tangible effects of this?
Yeah, I think those folks are the most vulnerable. Obviously, we've encouraged our producers to be prepared for the possibility of this happening, but you can only prepare so much. And the thing I think we often forget is these types of negotiations are long-term. They're not something that happens in a week or a day or a short period of time. It will take a long time to recover from the tariffs that have already been implemented or already talked about. And these negotiations are long and tough and difficult, and we are entirely dependent on trade in the state of Iowa and as pork producers in particular.
Yeah, Craig, you a farmer yourself, you talk to farmers all the time, obviously. What are they saying? What are the concerns out there?
Very concerning. They're very anxious, very apprehensive. There was a sliver of a prospect for hope of profit this year, and that's been dashed away, particularly for pork producers. And I'm a pork producer. We lost $20 a hundredweight pretty rapidly after the 23rd of March. And the future looks very glim. These trade relationships are built over time, decades. Rules are drafted. We have the WTO. We have agreements, free trade agreements all around the country. We've disposed of TPP, set that aside. NAFTA negotiations going on. Chorus, Korean, that was not signed by the president after it was finally negotiated. So we're in limbo. This is a very bad time for agriculture.
Mr. Weber, explain to a lay audience, a non-farm audience, what it means to a young pork producer. What's the value of a hog? What's happened to the value of a hog? Are they making any money? Explain how this works.
Okay, I can kind of summarize a couple of things. The pork industry has come through a period of relatively good, stable profitability since 2014. After the feed prices declined and we got through the episode of PEDV, we've come through a rather long period of profitability in the pork industry, one of the sectors in agriculture that has continued to do well despite some really marginal returns in the row crop sector. All through that same time period, our organization and our industry, we focus on export markets. That's our job. Free trade agreements we've worked diligently on. And I've often said that we're building up a little enthusiasm here in our industry. And then suddenly, starting 18 months ago, we had the new investment in the processing side of our industry with the 5 new packing plants being announced, a couple of them here in the state of Iowa. And so there was this hidden enthusiasm for producers to keep going. And if you looked at the most recent Hogs and Pigs report, this industry is still in a growth mode in preparation for that. There was a lot of enthusiasm and anticipation about participating in a whole new marketplace with TPP. Obviously, that was done away with or bowed out of, and we invested a lot of time and resources into TPP. So it kind of dashed the hopes of a lot of producers. And now the continued rhetoric on trying to rebalance existing free trade agreements. As Craig mentioned, we got through renegotiation of the Chorus agreement. We're still very uncertain as to what's going to happen with NAFTA. If we have difficulty in NAFTA, it would be catastrophic for U.S. agriculture.
You mentioned 3 different trade agreements that have been scuttled or are being reconsidered by the Trump administration. Mr. Hill, I want to ask you a hard question here. Rural America voted for Donald Trump. Did you make a mistake?
Oh, I wouldn't say we made a mistake. I would say that we will see what the outcomes are. And I think if producers are damaged to the extent that I think they could be, there will be some minds changed. Currently, I don't see a groundswell of anti-support for the Trump administration, but I will tell you, if what I think could happen does happen, it will not play very well at all.
How about Craig?
Same question to you.
Yeah, I would have to say the same thing. I don't think producers are willing to give up on the Trump administration. You know, I visit with my neighbors and friends and neighbors all the time, and think there's a lot of positive things that this administration is doing, and certainly has done for agriculture, especially on the regulatory side. Has done a lot for us, and it takes tough negotiations. I think agriculture is willing to do its part in the near term, but when you're the pawn that's being played with or moved, it becomes very, very serious.
Well, and Craig, you mentioned Iowa could be one of the first to be impacted on this.
Yes.
The tariffs also include cranberries, which will hit Wisconsin, auto making, which will hit Michigan. It sounds to me like China's reading an electoral map.
But about $19 billion goes to China from the U.S. in terms of ag commodities, and $12 to 14 billion of that is soybeans, and we're the number one or number two soybean producer. We volley back and forth with Illinois. Pork, we export 27% of our pork. Corn, China just took on an ambition to have 10% ethanol blend in all of their fleet vehicles by 2020. That's going to take 1 billion bushels of corn, which they don't have. So all of these things come right down to center in and hone in on Iowa and Iowa's farmers, worse than any other part of the country.
And I asked because if you add those other states, you're talking about states that the president won in this last election and in some cases flipped. Is China playing a political game here? Are they playing a game of 3D chess to the administration's
I'm sure.
checkers?
I mean, and you know, we had initially $3 billion in tariffs, and then $50 billion tit for tat, another $50 billion, $100 billion announced Friday, April 6th, and there's not $100 billion to put a tariff on or a tax on goods coming into the U.S. So what will China do? You can't, this cascade of events may get completely out of control.
The president,
one thing that I think I would say that would hold the glue together for this administration would be to get some positive news for producers and for farmers on trade. We need to begin negotiations on bilateral. He stressed all throughout his campaign the importance of bilateral free trade agreements, negotiating one-on-one for good trade deals with other countries. And we would really support that. We would really get behind that. We will be there to help negotiate new free trade agreements, but it's time. It's time to get these started.
the president said he had directed Sonny Perdue to come up with a shield for farmers. Does that mean crop insurance is going to apply to man-made disasters, Craig?
Well, I don't know how you indemnify producers. You know, we're not one-dimensional farmers. There are different farmers are going to be impacted in different ways. The Farm Bill's yet to be drafted. There's no money. I mean, Congress doesn't have the money to fix this. So there's a lot of problems. I don't know how you make farmers feel better with a promise of some reward from government, and it will be years before that happens.
So the flip side of this all is, and when you talk to leaders here in the state, is that they acknowledge there is an issue with some of the trade relationship with the U.S. and China, with theft of intellectual property. So there are steps that need to be taken. They just don't, as you mentioned, John, they just don't want ag to be held as a bargaining chip in that. So what is the administration to do? How do you tackle some of those things without disrupting the Midwest ag economy?
Yeah.
Well, you often think that there should be other avenues or political means of solving these issues, whether it's the WTO, trade disputes, those kinds of things. All of those take a significant amount of time. It seems to have been the practice of this administration to, call people out on the table up front and negotiate later. Maybe that tactic will work, but believe me, it's a very uncomfortable time for those of us that are involved.
Mr. Hill, what is an American president supposed to do? I mean, the Chinese have been stealing intellectual property from this country for years. There's no quarrel or arguing about that.
Yeah.
What other things could a president do?
I think there's lots of options other than a trade war.
Well, give me some examples.
Well, to give an example, direct to trade, the reason you negotiate over years and come to agreement on a trade agreement is so you have dispute resolution, you have rules of the game, you have standards in which everybody abides to with penalties. The WTO, NAFTA, there are dispute settlement mechanisms there if you have grievances or problems. And so you don't blow it up and renege on your agreement to create a new one. Actually, you go back to the original agreement and go through the process.
And I really think a little bit of a mistake that may have been made. I mean, agriculture has been the #1 sector of this economy that's helped offset the trade deficit. And yet we become an easy target.
Talk about the ripple effects of this, Mr. Hill. You know, the old saying, if farmers don't make it in Iowa, nobody does. Is that still true? What's the effect on rural communities out there that are already struggling? Is there a future for young people in farming? Big questions, this phrase.
Well, it is said that about 10% of Iowa's jobs are export related in terms of agriculture, but it grows to 20%. It's hard to put a fence around what is agriculture in Iowa, financial services and a whole host of other industries, manufacturing. So maybe 20% of our workforce is dedicated to an export proposition of some fashion. So yeah, it affects Iowa greatly in all of our communities, all ages, all investment. It affects our bankers. How timid will they be now to make investment and to allow young producers to borrow money?
The ripple effect to me is huge. It's also almost more than individual farmers. And one other thing I think we need to remember and remind producers of that I think is going to actually have more of a financial impact on producers is the cost of the tariffs that were implemented or will be implemented on steel and aluminum. Some of those stories I'm already hearing from Midwest suppliers of ag equipment, grain bins, buildings for pork producers are just escalating rapidly. And I think that's going to have a huge impact on future plans, future growth of the industry. That impact may very well have more of an impact than a country imposing tariffs on our product.
Craig, speaking of growth, farmers probably aren't going to be planting in the snow, but will they change and plant corn instead of soybeans?
I don't know if we're going to shift any planting decisions in Iowa. We may, on the margins of the country, there may be some shifting of acres, but most of our planting intentions are made in it, until we get after the 1st or 5th or maybe even 10th of May, there won't be probably a whole lot of shifting.
Will pig numbers drop?
We're certainly not in that mode today, and we don't want to be in that mode. It's our goal to negotiate free trade agreements. The growth of our industry is entirely dependent on future export markets. We are already exporting 26%, and we need, if we're going to grow our industry, keep it stable, we need to have access to these countries.
Real quickly, we've been focusing on China, but you mentioned NAFTA and pork. Boy.
Yeah, NAFTA makes this discussion seem minute.
50% of all of our pork goes to either the NAFTA countries or Korea, South Korea. So those 3 countries are 50% of our pork exports.
Gentlemen, Craig, if we could shift just quickly. There was action at the legislature this week, where the governor has signed a bill that will let Farm Bureau sell a well-marked product called a health benefit plan.
Yes.
Will farmers, independent farmers out there, be able to buy this if they have diabetes
Well, so the Iowa Farm Bureau has provided benefits to members for 100 years. We're a century-old organization as of this year. But for nearly 50 years, we've been a partner with Wellmark, and we provided health insurance to our members. In 2014, when the Affordable Care Act took effect, we were disqualified from offering that benefit to our members. What we're doing is restoring that opportunity for us to work with our members and work with Wellmark, to partner with Wellmark.
Do you know what
as
you're going to sell
administrator.
to people now?
Well, this is the individual marketplace. Employer plans, we're probably not going to have people coming from an employer plan. The subsidized Affordable Care Act guaranteed issue contracts, we're not going to be bringing those people over. It's going to be that farmer, that self-employed individual, that small business owner with an individual policy that's looking to save what we hope to be maybe half of their premium in another product.
Is there a danger that you'll be siphoning healthy people out of the individual marketplace and causing stabilization
This
issues
just
there?
provides another option. Every individual can look at their choices and they can make a decision. We think that we can provide a benefit to our membership, and that's what we're pursuing. It's been done in Tennessee. The Tennessee Farm Bureau currently does this. There's maybe other models, but that's the one that we looked at primarily.
I've got to leave it at that. We're out of time. Thank you both for taking time to be with us today. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Before we go, Iowa Public Television lost a leader this past month with the passing of former colleague, friend, and general manager Dan Miller. Dan spent 37 years at this network in roles including executive producer of public affairs, programming director, and general manager. And as we look back at his life and career, it's clear his lasting legacy continues.
Iowa Public Television would not be today what it is had it not been for Dan Miller.
When I think of Dan Miller, I think of a person who walked the line of integrity and enforced that on those with whom he was leading.
When you work in an organization like public broadcasting, you have pressures that come from many different places. And so your compass has to be set very carefully, and you need to follow it. And that's what Dan did.
I don't know where Iowa Public Television would be. It wouldn't be the powerhouse that it is now. There's no debate about that. It would be a very, very different network if it wasn't for Dan Miller.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. I'm going to turn to another member of our convention coverage team, Dan Miller, who was up very late last night covering a district caucus.
Dan Miller was extremely proud of Iowa Public Television and the influence. He saw potential.
A couple of weeks ago, you told our network that you believed that your words, public service, was the place that you thought you should make your contribution. What is it that Bob Ray wants to be remembered for?
Dan Miller was an intellectual.
How do you go about convincing a public that has always treated its prisons as out of sight and out of mind that they need to think about it a little bit more?
He was extremely defensive of the independence of Iowa Public Television.
Now, is that fair? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, it is a fair thing to say. He also understood that the function of journalism is to serve the community. And in the case of Iowa and Iowa Public Television, it was making this state a better place to live. In everything that's done, the arts, cultural things, politics, trying to inform people and move this state forward.
Many times after a program, I would either seek Dan out or call him on the telephone afterwards and ask him about his evaluation of that program, and he was never bashful about critiquing when I sought it, and sometimes when I didn't seek it.
He wanted the Iowa Press Show to move along, and what will stand out in my mind is if we weren't being sharp enough, we weren't being pointed enough, he was in this little earpiece, snoring, wake me up when it's over, letting us know that we needed to step up our game out there. And I will always remember getting that little wake-up call every now and then.
Hello, I'm Dan Miller, Director of Programming for Iowa Public Television. Beginning March 3rd, this stage will be alive with the sights and sounds of festival. Iowa Public Television's 2-week programming spectacular, showcasing the very finest of what this network has to offer.
As program director, Dan Miller assumed many duties, including hosting efforts during annual PBS pledge drives. His colleagues would later surprise him in studio with one of his favorite IPTV guests and Dan's mother.
And here comes the two-legged dog, Rusty, the two-legged dog that Dan is...
My goodness!
Who heard it? They did on Living in Iowa. this incredible two-legged dog. It is a dog that has a show that has received more comments than anything they've done, and we knew this was his birthday, and Danny just loves this dog. Danny was always the perfect child.
Perfect. He was the youngest and perfect. Absolutely. We expected him on St. Patrick's Day, but as always, 2 days late.
Yeah. And he's been that way ever since.
Well, I thought I better tell it tonight.
He really put Iowa Public Television on the map nationally, I would say, with PBS, CPB, APTS. I mean, people really started talking about Iowa Public Television when he became GM.
I was always struck by his intellect, by his, frankly, his intellectual curiosity, but also his kind and beautiful heart. He really touched so many people in our industry, and there are many of us who are always beholden to his great joy in life.
Very colorful guy, quite profane, although very careful about not doing it around all these microphones.
Dan meant the world to me. I would say that he was almost like another father to me, but he would be so mad if I said that because he was, you know, he's not that much older than me. So, you know, I would say he's like a big brother.
What would Iowa Public Television have been without Dan Miller? I don't think as effective, nearly as effective as it is today in tying Iowans together and letting them know the various things that are going on in this state and instilling a lot of pride in Iowans.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.